Ahmed Kaballo is a figure of great importance, a great footballer, a Manchester United supporter, a friend of mine for many years, now living in Africa and the CEO and founder of African Stream, an increasingly influential source of news, information, and analysis about Africa. He hastens from Sudan. His father, a leading figure in the Communist Party of Sudan. So we're going to start at the top of Africa, but I promise him we're going to end up at the bottom of it. Ahmed Kaballo, welcome on board. The mother of all talk shows. Good to see you again. Manchester United have done better this season, but still a lot more to do. I know you'll be following from Africa every kick of every ball. I do, and I'm even farther away than you are from Old Trafford right now. Let's start with the events in Sudan. Who's fighting whom, on whose behalf, and who's winning, who's losing?
Okay, thank you for having me, George. And yeah, great to be on your show once again. I've been listening and it's a fantastic show so far. So who's fighting who? So there is Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemeti, who is the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, fighting on one side, and there is General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the leader of the armed forces, fighting on the other side. Now, what they're fighting for is quite unclear at the moment because I can't see victory for either side. So it seems to be perpetual fighting. In my opinion, with the overall long-term goals of derailing the move towards democracy, which now looks further afield than it's ever looked. Now, who's backing who? That's a very interesting question. So Egypt backs General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan for several reasons. One of the reasons is because they want to see an army in control, an army that they control. And they also don't want to see democracy in Sudan, which could trigger, a move towards democracy in Egypt just across the border. But a bigger reason why Egypt backs Abdel Fattah al-Burhan is because of this perpetual tension that could lead to conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Great Renaissance Dam. Now, Sudan historically has been in favor of the dam because the dam can help control, the water of the Nile. Every year, the River Nile's banks flood and destroy the agriculture in Sudan. So actually, a dam would benefit us. But since Burhan came into power, they've been siding with Egypt against Sudan's national interest. That's number one. Number two, since the TPLF was removed from power democratically, the United States has been looking for a reliable ally in the region, and Burhan presents them as that reliable ally. Burhan is the one that pushed for normalization with Israel, which was a signal to the West that it was a change from the old guard, change from this kind of hostility that defined the Bashir years. And Burhan has actually been supporting the TPLF in their insurgency against Ethiopia and Eritrea. So that's, that covers Egypt and the US, but we have many more players. We have General Haftar from Libya, who supports the Rapid Support Forces, who the Rapid Support Forces was used in General Haftar's push for power in Libya. We have the UAE, who supports the Rapid Support Forces. General Hemeti controls the biggest gold mines in Sudan. Most of that gold ends up in the UAE. Both the UAE and the Persian Gulf states are very interested in the Port of Sudan region, which is a strategically very important region as it has access to the Suez Canal, the Gulf of Aden, the Horn of Africa, and the Middle East. And then, of course, we haven't even got into the discussion about the Russian naval base and the role that it plays in all of this. Now, obviously, none of this can be proved, but the US Embassy came back to Sudan on the 22nd of April, 2022. And then the US Embassy evacuated Sudan on the 23rd of April, 2023. In the space of that year, we had the US ambassador warning the military council, which consisted of Hemeti and Burhan, against this Russian naval base, saying there will be dire consequences. And here we are, less than a year later. Not to say it's them, but we've definitely seen dire consequences on the streets of Khartoum, Bahri, and Umdurman.
It sounds like there are no winners, but it's obvious who are the losers. And the losers are the poor people of Sudan, with their yearning for a proper democracy in their country. Their infrastructure, such as it was, is being destroyed. Their very lives are at stake if they walk out onto the street. What do you think public opinion can do in these circumstances where two armed bodies of men are confronting each other? You might say two bald men fighting over a comb.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because usually in a conflict, there's a side that you want to win. And in this situation, both sides are reactionary. Both sides have caused, distress and terror to the people of Sudan for many years. The Sudanese army has been responsible for 7 coups since independence. It was the military apparatus behind Bashir as he conducted his, genocidal policy in Darfur and the Blue Nile region and Nuba Mountains. And then on the other hand, we have the Rapid Support Forces, which was the army fighting on the ground in Darfur, which has been in the last few years a kind of mercenary gun for hire group used in Central African Republic, Libya, Chad, and Mali. So it's like, who do you want to win? And there was a recent audio recording from, allegedly someone in the army saying that they should use the fighting to kill the leaders of the freedom forces in change. So the Sudanese people are really stuck between a rock and a hard place because, the military winning this conflict will only embolden them and make, the democracy movement weakened. And the Rapid Support Forces, which is a genocidal outfit winning this conflict, would be a disaster as well. So, I was just given a speech via Zoom in Burkina Faso, and they asked me the same question: what's the solution? And unfortunately, I don't have an answer. I guess the best thing that the Sudanese people can hope for is for both sides to run out of bullets and to, come to the table and negotiate some sort of settlement.
Dismal indeed. Ahmed, I just read this afternoon about one of many, not just in Africa, but around the world, these Christian evangelical crackpots who gather a following in their cult and then murder them. I'm reading now in Kenya, hundreds of people have been murdered by their cult leader and their organs harvested. And the name of the cult is Good News International Church. What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really terrible story. And I think, the problem behind the story is that in Africa, as the rest of the world, but felt more acutely in Africa, there's this huge economic crisis that has been exacerbated by this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And this economic crisis has exacerbated these preachers who prey on the neediness and the desperation of their people. And this idea that you can get closer to God if you do these ridiculous, sacrifices or donations. It's kind of like Victorian Britain, where, there'd be a preacher on the side of the street telling the peasants to give all their savings to get into heaven. And we're seeing more and more of these cases. We've done a few reports about it on African Stream, and we've got more reports coming up. It's a really, really sad story. President William Ruto has described it as an act of terrorism. And I think that's probably an accurate description. And yeah, it's just a real sad story where a preacher has preyed on those that are desperate But unfortunately, this isn't an isolated incident, and we're seeing more and more of these stories pop up, especially as the economic crisis exacerbates. So for everyone's sake, we need, this conflict in Ukraine to be over, and for the economic crisis that has inflicted the whole world, but particularly Africa at the moment, to come to an end.
Finally, some good news. Although the ANC government in South Africa has been a huge disappointment in many ways, perhaps increasingly so. Certainly for me, I speak personally, I suppose, on that. They sure have stood up to the United States over the issue of Russia, Ukraine, and they left the American ambassador no alternative but a humiliating withdrawal and apology for the attack on the government he is accredited to over the issue of weapons supplies. Bring us up to date, would you, on that?
Yeah, I mean, the US has accused South Africa of supplying weapons to Russia. South Africa denied it. However, they said they would set up some sort of inquiry, which to me sounded strange. Why would you need to, investigate something that is not true? I'm not aware of the latest regarding the retraction by the South African government. So apologies for that. Maybe you can update me.
Well, no, the South Africans summoned the American ambassador. They gave him real blasting. And subsequently, the American ambassador apologized to South Africa for clearly crossing the line of undiplomatic behavior. But I suppose my overarching point was the vast majority of people in South Africa know that it was Russia that was on their side fighting apartheid, and America that was on the side of apartheid.
Exactly, and we saw this with the proposed BRICS summit, which is going to happen in August in South Africa. We saw Julius Malema, who's the leading opposition figure from a black party, saying that he would personally, escort President Putin to the country. We saw President Ramaphosa saying that, it's time to maybe leave the ICC. And that's because, Africans' history or memory isn't as short as the West would like us to think it is. We remember who supported apartheid. We remember who opposed apartheid. And if South Africa wants to do drills with China and Russia, that is their right. If it wants to orbit towards, towards China and Russia, that is their right. And we're seeing that actually this policy by the United States of weaponizing their currency, weaponizing their dollar, is actually having an adverse effect and pushing more and more countries towards Russia and China. We saw it recently as Kamala Harris visited Africa. She was humiliated in Zambia. She was then humiliated in Gambia. She visited Tanzania and had a good photo with the newly elected female president. But still, overall, it was seen as a disaster for the United States. And that's because they're insisting that we take a part in a conflict. However, any other international issue of the day, they don't want to hear our voice. We Africans never got asked for our position vis-a-vis Israel-Palestine, but now we're asked to take a position vis-a-vis Ukraine-Russia. Africa was never, the UN General Assembly was never seen as an important vehicle when every year they unanimously vote against the blockade against Cuba. But now the UN General Assembly is this important vehicle that we all need to utilize. So it's just hypocrisy at its finest, and Africans can see it. And that's why, state by state, they see their path towards prosperity closer aligned to China in particular than the United States. The debts that China incurs on Africa doesn't come with conditions on how to spend your money on austerity, on IMF structural readjustment programs. So, it's an obvious choice, and it's obvious why all these African nations are moving in that direction.
Finally, Ahmed, how do people follow your work? How can people support it?
Well, for once, I'm going to say not to follow me, Ahmed Kaballo, follow African Stream. All of the good work that I'm putting in is, coming out via African Stream. So follow African Stream on TikTok, where we've now got 290,000 followers. Follow us on Instagram, where we've now got over 80,000 followers and growing. And we only launched at the end of September. So we've got a fantastic, young, dynamic team. We're all based, the core of the team is based in Nairobi. We've got freelancers in Nigeria, a freelancer in Haiti, a freelancer in Burkina Faso, and we're continuing to expand. And finally, if you're a Pan-African anti-imperialist journalist, please contact us, as we're looking to expand the team every single day.